60 Minutes with Angela starts right now.
Since 29th of May 2015, my host today has been the acting president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, at least I believe about 4 times. Twice in 2016 and twice already in 2017. The first time was in February 2016, where he was acting president for 5 days, followed that up again in June same year for a period of 13 days. This year he has been acting president from the 19th of January to the 10th of March. Yemi Osinbajo is a senior advocate of Nigeria, a professor of law and one of Nigeria's leading experts in national and regional corporate commercial law, public law, and the law of evidence. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President, for speaking with me today. By your admission, you say the economy is the biggest challenge that this administration has, but you also chair the National Economic Council. What does that council do? Who are its members?
Well, the National Economic Council is the council of governors, and I chair the council. There are also a few members of the Federal Executive Council who are members of the, well, who are, if you like, nominal sort of members who come in to present reports and all that. But essentially a council of the federal government. I chair it, and the 36 governors.
Yes.
That's the National Economic Council. Well, the National Economic Council basically looks at all of the sorts of cross-cutting issues that concern the economy across the states and all that.
Yes.
For example, when the states were finding it difficult to pay salaries, we had to intervene about 3 or 4 times. And that's simply because you can't speak of the Nigerian economy outside of the 36 states. I mean, all that there is to describe as federal territory is Abuja.
Yes.
So really Nigeria is about 36 states. And so we really have to pay attention to what's going on in the states. And that's why the National Economic Council is important. But we also present to them, as a rule, we present our own budget to them, not for modification or anything, but more for their information. And they sometimes need some of the information that we need to provide. For instance, they need to know what benchmarks we're using for oil price, you know, what the other macroeconomic indicators are, you know, and all that. So we make presentations to them. We also make, when we have a major policy, we make presentations to them as well. For instance, when we have a major industrial policy, you know, we make presentations to them just so that they can contribute and, you know, and hopefully add to, or in some senses, improve the quality of whatever that policy is. Again, you really can't go outside of the states, you know, because these are the components of the federation. And so we have to continuously engage with them. But the National Economic Council is different from the economic management team. I chair the economic management team as well. Now the economic management team is a team of the Federal Executive Council, is a group of ministers picked from the Federal Executive Council. Yes. They form the economic management team, including the central bank governor, and a few other, you know, officials.
What's the difference in what both teams do?
Well, for one thing, the economic management team is really more for driving our own policies. That's federal government policy.
Right.
So, for example, we're looking at a tomato policy or rice policy. We decide that we're going to be self-sufficient in rice production by 2018.
Yes.
How are we going to get that done? What are the timelines? What are the various issues that need to come into consideration?
Yes.
So the economic management team thinks through those things, plans those things, lays out a plan for execution, and tries to implement. Same as in other aspects of the economy. Basically, where, if you like, make it happen sort of squad. I mean, our businesses to go ahead and, because policy is really developed by the Federal Executive Council, by the manifesto of the party in some cases, the budget, our economic recovery and growth plan, and all of those kinds of things. Now, in particular, the economic recovery and growth plan.
Yes.
That's a major.
What is that? I keep reading about that everywhere. EGRP.
Yes.
What are the key components of that?
Yeah, essentially, this is a medium-term plan. It's a medium-term economic recovery plan, and also it shows in which direction we expect, how we expect to grow.
Okay.
And so it really is a medium-term plan, 2017 to 2020, and we've set there what our objectives are, what the pillars of our economic recovery plan will be, what the macroeconomic parameters that we expect will be, our production levels, what are the areas that we're looking at in particular, agriculture, power,
like
industry.
A development plan we used to have back in the day.
Like a development plan. Essentially, that's what it is. Okay. So it then forms the basis of budgets, so it's the basis of the 2017 budget, basis of the 2018, 2019, as we go on. Okay. So anybody who looks at our economic recovery and growth plan can essentially see where we are going, what our projections are, so that if you're an investor, you can tell straight away that, look, what these guys want to do in the next 3 years is X, Y, Z. So you can then take a cue from that and decide what you want to do.
Plug yourself in somewhere. On May 24 this year, 2017, you were speaking at the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industries Presidential Policy Dialogue session. You said that the federal government has developed a number of sectoral policies on tomato and cement. Tell us about those two policies. I see that they're strategic. Cement for infrastructure, tomato for agriculture. And those are two things that this administration is focusing on.
Tomato policy, what it is this. As you know, I mean, tomato paste is imported into the country, and there are, factories or, plants that just simply pack imported tomato paste and then sell. So what we're saying is that
when you say pack, they bring
it
in bulk.
They bring in, like, if you like, almost like concentrates.
Yes.
And then they pack them
into little sizes,
sachets, into tins, depending on, So there's really no value added. The tomato is imported from somewhere, and all they're really doing is putting it into packs. Now that really doesn't add any value as such, and what we decided to do is that, look, we have hundreds of thousands of farmers who plant tomatoes. There's a need for us to use their tomatoes rather than the imported tomatoes. So really, our policy is that by 2018, all of the tomato paste that we'll be using will be from our own homegrown, if you like, our own homegrown tomatoes. So that's really the long and short of the policy, that we have a deadline for importation of any kind of tomatoes. At the moment, we have certain levies and tariffs on even on importation, so that those who are producing tomatoes locally and also those who are processing tomatoes locally have an advantage over just importing tomatoes. So there are 1 or 2 factories, one in Kano, which is quite a large factory, where they're already processing tomatoes to tomato paste and all that. And we hope that many more will come on stream, and they will come on stream if they find that the policy is working, if they find that that we're not allowing importation, the way that this had been done in the past. And we're seeing a lot of improvement in, actual local production of tomato. As for cement, in its own case, now we are now, as it were, self-sufficient in cement production.
Really?
Yeah, we are net exporters now of cement, and so I think that cement is a major success story in Nigeria, because what has happened is that we are producing our own cement, and there are 3 major cement companies that are doing excellently. you know, and already we're seeing that, you know, export of cement is, nobody is really importing cement, doesn't really, nobody's importing any cement.
Yes.
So I think that that's one of the major success stories of the country. And that's not our own, it's not, we did not initiate the cement policy, but we encouraged it, and we continue to encourage it, because we believe that that's really the way to go. And it sets a model for, you know, self-sufficiency in other areas, in other products, and, you know, produce in the case of agriculture and all that.
Well, we haven't been very lucky with the economic indices here, especially with the low price of crude oil. We've also seen our production at its lowest levels in at least 3 decades. So it's important that we look to non-oil revenues at this time, because according to the Minister of Finance, it is the most stable. That brings me to the question of tax. You've signed an executive order as far as tax is concerned. Is that solely to offer amnesty to tax defaulters and evaders?
Well, it is to offer amnesty, but amnesty, of course, is for a purpose. The purpose being that what we're saying is that if you, within the next 90 days from the date the executive order was signed,
Yes.
if you declare your taxes accurately, this is self-assessment tax. If you declare your taxes, for example, if you own property abroad, we expect that taxes will be paid, you know, for property that's owned abroad.
Okay.
And if you declare your taxes within the 90-day period, we'll forgive all penalties and all of that, and criminal or civil prosecution.
How will you know if I own house abroad?
Now, the good thing about that is that the whole world is changing. The UK, for example, is by next year, they're doing this beneficial ownership of property where they'll expose all owners of property. So the information will become readily available. In fact, one of the reasons for the timing of our voluntary assets declaration scheme is what is going on, what the UK is doing. And many other countries are opening up in that way. But the UK is important for us in Nigeria because most Nigerians want to own property in the UK. So we're going to make a few very important discoveries. So if people don't confess, we will eventually find out where, you know, where their property is, and they'd have to make payment. So the whole idea is that it's a voluntary assets declaration scheme. There's an amnesty period, that's the 90-day period, within which we expect you to come up with the proper self-assessment. We expect to improve tax revenue.
From that.
Yeah.
I was listening to the Minister of Finance talking about how we have 69 million economically active Nigerians, but only 14 million of those are paying taxes. And of those 14 million, only 214 people pay taxes of 20 million naira or more. And all those 214 are based in Lagos. Are we saying that?
No, actually 212 are based in Lagos. The other 2 are in Ogun State.
In Ogun State.
Yes.
So what about Port Harcourt, Abuja?
They're hiding their money, and they're not obviously, I mean, it's obvious, isn't it, that there are loads of people who should be paying over 20 million in taxes, over 10 million even. If you look at it, even 10 million, it still is a ridiculous number.
Is the government considering the fact that a lot of people are reluctant to pay taxes because they think that they're not getting any dividends of democracy?
But isn't it chicken and egg? I mean, you don't pay taxes, so you don't get any dividends. So you don't get any dividends, you don't pay any taxes. I mean, people are meant to pay their taxes first, because it's taxpayers' money that's meant to be used for development. And if you hold back your taxes, aside from the fact that it's criminal, and there are, of course, civil consequences as well. You know, I think it's important that people pay. If you look at the old Western region, for instance, or even the days of the old regions, late 50s to early 60s, tax was the main source of funding anything. For instance, look at the free education. Free education in the West was funded largely by adult tax. I mean, and that's huge. I mean, that's free education with the whole of the Western region was funded by taxes. But with the coming of the military, you know, and of course oil money, We just completely forgot about taxes. So those who pay tax today are people who are either in the organized private sector or public service, nobody else. I mean, the sorts of other people who are self-assessed are simply not paying any tax. That's why our tax to GDP is one of the lowest in the world.
They say it's 6%, that ratio.
Yeah.
What should it be?
Well, if you compare countries like ours, you'll be more in the region of about 20 to 30. I mean, countries that are comparator countries, more in that range. 6% is ludicrous. I mean, there's absolutely no basis for that kind of thing. Yes.
You proposed a special investors conference as well. Who is a special investor?
Well, I think the point of the special investors conference is really targeting investors. So it's not an all-comers event. So we've decided what areas we're interested in. So we decide, for instance, that we're interested in tomato production. We decide that we're interested in power. So it's more targeted investors. So these are the sorts of people that we're talking about. So we actually invite you to come on the basis of the fact that we know that you can invest in a target area, in an area that we consider important. So we're not just sending an all-out invitation to
everybody to come.
Yeah, so that's really what that is.
All right. Join us again after the break.
Nice question.
Angela, that's a great question.
It's a good question.
It is difficult to respond to that question.
That is a serious question. Angela, that is a very great question.
Great question, Angela.
Angela, that's a very difficult question.
That's a great question, Angela.
Okay, that's a great question.
Angela, that's a tough one for me.
That's a good question. Good question.
I love to ask questions. I think it's what I do best. You see, I think that the fastest way to learn anything is to ask questions. The right questions that help you get to the heart of the matter.
60 Minutes with Angela. Gain answers to every question you always wanted to ask.
Welcome back. All this talk of investors, of course, brings to mind the challenge we still have with electricity. We've hit 6,000 megawatts now, but it has become obvious that generating that amount of electricity is different from distributing it. What next can this government do to improve electricity supply?
I think that we're at a point where where the options are very clear. We started off by wanting to increase power on the grid, on the national grid. And of course, the limitations are the limitations you pointed out. That at a certain point, first, transmission, even the capacity to transmit on the national grid as it is today is constrained, because at a certain point, we just don't have the capacity to do so. So what we're trying to do now with our, what is called the independent customers, you now ask a DISCO or a GENCO to identify its own customers so they can then do off-grid power to supply certain areas. So it's easier now with the kinds of rules that we're writing for a state government. If you recall, the Lagos state government used to has plants and has about 4 or 5 plants. Supplies many of the public buildings on the island and on some parts of the mainland, and of course the street lights. But now the Lagos state government, under the new rules, can sell power to persons, to independent customers. You can decide that, okay, we're going to produce 10 megawatts of power. They're even doing 3,000 megawatts of power, and then can then begin to sell their own power. So the model that we're trying to use now is one that doesn't depend on the grid alone. So there'll be lots of off-grid options, solar options that are off-grid, gas options that are off-grid, thermal options that are off-grid and all that. So we think that the way to go is really to decentralize, power production.
Before, when you put what you have into the grid, it still has the problem of distribution. Like Lagos State put theirs in the grid, they can't even guarantee the people in Lagos.
Distribution the problem with distribution is a bit different. So we have these DISCOs who are, the distribution companies. The problems they have is, one, metering. Most of their customers are not metered, which is a problem that they ought to resolve.
Right.
But then there are all sorts of complex arguments around whether they have enough money or whether the government has done its own part, etc. But the problem really is that there are too many customers that are not metered. That's one. And secondly, there are so many people who are using power without paying. So collection, there are large collection losses. Some are technical losses, some are just commercial losses. There are real losses for the disco. So for example, a Genco, that's a generating company, gives you the disco 100 megahertz of power. The Genco expects you to pay for the 100 megahertz of power. But you distribute your 100 megahertz of power to a group of people who are not paying. So you are only able to sell, you know, in other words, collect money for 50 megahertz of power. But as far as the Genco is concerned, I've given you 100 megahertz of power, pay me. So we have all of those kinds of constraints, and that's one of the reasons why we had a liquidity problem in the value chain. So the Genco doesn't get paid what he ought to get paid. Then the person who is giving you gas isn't being paid.
Yes.
So he shuts off his gas.
Says, I'm not giving you anymore.
Yeah, I'm not giving you anymore. So Genco can't produce and all of that. So there is a whole value chain problem. But what we've done with that is a payment assurance guarantee that we put together. In other words, we've now sort of resourced the entire value chain with about 700 billion.
Yes.
You know, that helps to pay the gas, helps to pay for Gencos and all that. So everyone down the value chain is relieved, you know, and we can continue to produce power and hopefully distribute power. But we think the ultimate solution is really the off-grid power, you know, using various methods as opposed to just, you know, on-grid power. So that's really what we're looking at.
I want to talk to you about one of the executive orders that you gave directing the resumption of 24-hour operations at the Apapa ports.
Yes.
One of the things that I found out is that with electricity challenges, the generator at the port is switched off at 5 p.m. So the order looks good on paper, but in practice, it's still difficult.
Well, what it is and what we're trying to do, there are a few more complications aside from the generator. But what we've found is that it's entirely possible to run a 24-hour operation in the ports because the port is supposed to be self-resourced.
Yes.
It makes its own money. And if it runs a 24-hour operation, it obviously makes more money if it's able to do so. I meet with the MPA, the Director General of the MPA regularly, and the Managing Director, and we've seen that it is possible, but they need help in order to be able to do so. So they themselves are investing in trying to do, because it's in their interest. It's not, I mean, it makes sense for them to make more money.
Yes.
And many people are not used to a 24-hour operation in the ports anyway. So it will take a bit of time for that to ramp up and all that. But they are investing in all those things. You can, I mean, factories work 24 hours all over Nigeria. So putting on a generator for 24 hours is not a big deal, you know. But the more important thing is that there are also all sorts of other logistic issues that need to be put in place. But the good thing is that we are monitoring all of the operations of these agencies on almost on a weekly basis. So one is following up, checking what's going on now, how close are you to doing this, how close are you to doing that. So we set them, you know, the target, and we're keeping their feet to the fire so that they make sure that they deliver.
Just as an aside, I've asked you 2 questions now on executive orders. I'm not sure if I'm the only one who didn't know that Nigeria also had executive orders. I only heard about them when President Trump started issuing them. Have we always had executive orders?
Well, we've always had the capacity, the constitutional capacity.
But you're the first to use them, as far as I know.
Possibly. I'm not so sure that anyone else has tried using them. But they're there. I mean, it's the constitutional capacity.
Why do we use executive orders?
Well, executive orders are more or less for your own operations. So we have the federal government of Nigeria under the powers of the president.
Yes.
The president can order, you know, agencies, ministries, you know, bodies, groups, whatever, to do certain things in a certain way. You know, so really, it's the exercise of presidential power, you know, to be able to do those things. I'm not entirely certain anyway why it hasn't been used in the past. I don't know why, but I mean, it's useful anyway. It's very useful.
The G7 meeting that you attended this year in May in Italy, why was it important for you to attend that?
Several things. Well, first, we were invited to come to the meeting because it's a G7 meeting, and we're not G7 members. You know, so there were a few issues that obviously the G7 countries were interested in. They were interested in security. They were interested in trade, you know, oil, trade, you know, all those kinds of issues.
Yes.
So it was an invitation to come and discuss some of those issues with them. They had many questions they wanted to ask, many issues, you know, cooperation type issues, you know, how can we cooperate, for instance, in international security matters. There's ISIL, there's Boko Haram, there's El Shabaab, you know, all sorts of terrorist organizations here and there. So how can we work together and those kinds of things? And then trade as well, you know, in what ways can we cooperate in trade, you know, and what all the other, what sort of issues there are that we, you know, that we should consider and all that. So that's why we were invited.
Why do we still have attacks by Boko Haram? I mean, if we said we technically defeated them, they're only attacking soft targets, we still see Boko Haram still being rampant.
Yeah. No, but let me explain that. You know, first, of course, as of 2015, Boko Haram was in physical occupation of 7 local governments. In other words, they were in control of 7 local governments, hoisted their flags, set up government, as it were, in 7 local governments. So the question of defeating Boko Haram is, first of all, clearing them out so that they are not holding any territory whatsoever. Now, they are unable to hold territory, not because they've been technically defeated, no, but because they have been decimated as a fighting force. And the reason why they were able to hold territory before was that they were essentially a strong fighting force, and they could not only seize territory, but retain territory, which is really the essence of, you know, the kind of force that, you know, you would say a fighting army should have.
Yes.
So that has been effectively decimated. That fighting force is decimated. So there is no longer effectively a Boko Haram fighting force. Now, what you have are bands of these individuals. Now, these bands of, you know, Boko Haram criminals or terrorists attack targets here and there, and I'll explain that also. Now, this is all over the northeast. Now, just to get a sense of the area of this northeast, the northeast, which is the area where Boko Haram is supposed to have been operating. In fact, in the past, it was operating. It went as far as Kano, even Abuja, went all over. But now we don't hear any more of that. But the Northeast itself, just to give you a sense of how large the Northeast is, that's the whole of the United Kingdom, plus Switzerland or Denmark. That's a whole...
That's the surface area.
That's the surface area of the Northeast. So protecting the entire Northeast from bands of criminals, you know, who go here, 7 of them, 8 of them. In fact, even just to add to it, Portugal, Austria, Ireland, all together, plus Switzerland, all of that territory is still not the size of the Northeast region. So you're really dealing with a huge expanse of territory. And because it's such a huge expanse of territory, it's not difficult at all for bands of criminals to strike here, strike there, and give the impression that we're still all over, we're effective.
Yes.
And that really is a problem. I mean, if you look at some of the European countries, we even have you know, sometimes better law enforcement than we have. I mean, look at the sheer number of times that terrorists have struck in Paris and recently in Spain and all that. Yeah, and this is the nature of asymmetric warfare. People can go strike here, strike there, and that kind of thing. So I think that we must put it in context. I mean, the real context of this is that Boko Haram as a fighting force really doesn't exist anymore. You know, and that's why they can't really seize territory, take over here and there. They've been, you know, but we're still going to find them using little girls, 11-year-olds, 10-year-olds, strapping them up with IEDs, sending them off to mosques and churches and places of, you know, where people gather to, you know, blow up people and all that. Now that is a much more difficult animal to deal with, much more difficult animal to deal with, because really it's not warfare, properly speaking. This is just terrorist activity. But again, a lot depends on intelligence, on how effective intelligence is, how you're able to gather intelligence and, you know, fight. But we're really ramping up in terms of you know, getting local intelligence, knowing where these guys are, knowing their source of funding, and, you know, trying to keep up with them wherever they are and stop attacks before they even get going.
You've designated hate speech as terrorism. The fear now is that perhaps this is another way for this administration to
start catching people.
Yes, to silence the opposition. Because what is the objective test? You know, how do we determine what is hate speech?
Yes. And that's the reason why when I made the statement I made, I actually cited the law, you know. And the reason why I cited the law was just to avoid this feeling that it is just a, you know, that what we're trying to do is just some kind of blanket
to catch
law
people.
to just say, well, we are now deprived of your freedom of expression. Yes. What it is this, and the reason why we describe it as terrorism is that the Terrorism Act actually says that just is where you do an act that seriously intimidates a population or may cause destruction to social setting, to a country, community, etc., then that is hate speech. That is an act of terrorism. So the point we're making is that if you make a statement that is such as to seriously intimidate any section of the Nigerian populace, or that may lead to a situation where a section of the Nigerian populace may be destroyed or they may be harmed in any way. And of course, if you make a statement that incites to violence, clearly that would be such a statement. Part of the reason why the Terrorism Act is framed in the way it's framed is because of the way that, you know, hate speech has been used to promote terrorist activity all over the world. You know, so somebody stands somewhere and says all people of a certain tribe are animals and they should be dealt with, or all people of a certain tribe, you can't live here, you must leave this place, and those kinds of things. That is hate speech. That seriously intimidates a population, and we simply can't tolerate it. A lot of the countries that passed terrorism acts after 2011, and you'll notice that many of the anti-terrorism laws all over the world were after 9/11, you know, because people suddenly realized that this thing called freedom of expression can really be taken to the sorts of limits that just completely destroy even the very freedom of expression itself. So I think that we, you know, fortunately have passed an anti-terrorism act. You know, we passed it in 2011 also. And that act is one that enables us to be able to check the kinds of incendiary speeches that people are making.
You mean it's been there since 2011?
Oh, it's been there, it's been there, it's been there, it's been there. It was just that nobody paid attention to it. Nobody paid attention. But it's really been there, yes.
Can't believe that. Still on insecurity, increased cases of kidnapping and abductions. Is the federal government paying any attention to it, or are you leaving it up to the devices of the state governments?
We are paying a lot of attention to it. As a matter of fact, I believe it was last Thursday or so, when we held a summit, a security summit, invited all the governors of the states, all the service chiefs, the IG of police, the Director General of the SSS, everybody, to come and sit down and talk about these issues and what we need to do. You know, so it's serious enough to invite the attention of everybody who is in charge of security in one shape or form, and that's really what we try to achieve. Now, we set a few guidelines as to what we need to do. One of the critical things that we agreed on is community policing. I mean, you know that there have been all sorts of agitation for state police, and we believe strongly that state police is the way to go. That's the position our party, the APC, took, and that's the position that we still maintain. There are arguments back and forth about that, but in the absence of state police, we think that community policing is a good place to start. In every local government, you have DPOs in every local government. Now, what we want to do is to have a situation where every one of those DPOs sets up a small committee of people within his own community there.
Civilians.
Civilians, yes. These are people, some of them may be leaders, religious leaders, whoever. He sets up a committee of people who attend to security issues on a daily basis. We're also hoping that on every street, the DPO has 1 or 2 people who can inform, just inform, tell us what's going on and all of that. We think that that way we can actually get everyone involved in security. Now, this country is huge. I mean, we have almost 180 million people, nooks and crannies all over the place. And what has worked everywhere, really, even in Nigeria, what has worked, especially in the hinterland, is that you cannot come to a community and you will not be known. I mean, you can't just show up on the street and you're wandering up with
no one knows where you work.
I mean, people will say, okay, this person has just come. We want you to give, this is where the person is staying now, why is he there, and all of that. So we're hoping that we can just increase community participation in policing, and we're hoping that we can achieve that through the community policing options and all that. But that's aside from the more hardcore policing that we're doing. We're looking at, we've set up an intelligence team for kidnap cases alone. That's also federal, state level. We're looking at how to bring that down to the, local government levels and community levels and all that. The thing with security generally is that you just have to keep being proactive, because this is a very dynamic environment. So
things
you just
change
have to
every day.
So it's just more a matter of keeping everybody on their toes. So people understand what's going on. The police also understand what's going on. I mean, people are always, of course, criticizing the police, but really, I mean, these guys make an effort. They do their best,
Do we have enough policemen? Don't we need more?
Well, this is one of the reasons why why some of us agitate for state police. Because I think the states ought to be able to individually recruit, So Lagos State, for example, might decide that, look, I have a population of 18 million, 20 million. I'm not happy with my 10,000 policemen. I want 50,000. And so I recruit more. And we think that that's one of the ways by which this whole concept of devolution of powers can work, so that you at least, even if you're not doing the full-scale state police, you are allowing some powers of the central police force to devolve to the states. So a state, for instance, can decide that we will hire 100 more policemen, but these policemen, we are going to pay them, we are going to, and then how do we integrate them into the central police force? We'll work that out and all that, So that's the sort of thing. We definitely need more policemen, not everywhere, not in every state. But clearly there are states that need far more policemen, far more equipment, than everywhere else.
Join us again after the break. Welcome back. One of the fears about the state police is that they may be used by the chief executives of different states. How can we guard against that?
But again, with practically with everything, you're going to have to take some of the downsides, and those are possibilities, obvious possibilities. But don't forget that even with the presence of the state police, you're still going to have the federal police. So the federal police is supervising, interstate criminality and certain things like elections and those kinds of things, mainly the federal police. So you will still have a federal police force. Then you would have, the state police. But again, I mean, it's difficult. It's like saying whatever it is that anyone controls, they can abuse the power. But you can't, on that account, say that you're not going to look for the best way of policing your environment. And we've seen that the centralized police force has very serious limitations. You can't control crime prevention and detection from Abuja. It's obvious that that's very, that's not going to work, especially as population increases.
And onto the war of corruption. We can't say that war is being fought successfully. Sometimes, to me, it looks as if it's just the president and the vice president who are fighting the war. Not all members of the government seem to be on the same page with the president about that war. Would that be a correct assessment?
No, certainly not a correct assessment. Certainly not. I think the war against corruption is successful, but it's nowhere near how we expect it to be or where we expect it to be now.
Yes.
We of course expect that we would have made far more successes than we've made so far. But one of the things I want that I just want to highlight is, first, we are recovering property. We're recovering cash, we're recovering real estate from several people who we believe have looted the funds of this country. So we're recovering large amounts of property and all of that. Where we're experiencing difficulty is with convictions, high-profile persons being convicted. Now, we have a problem with that mainly because the judicial system is slow. Now, the judicial system is independent. You know, I do not give orders to the Chief Judge or the Chief Justice of Nigeria or whoever it is. I mean, they are, you know, they constitute an independent arm of government. But there is a major problem with administration of justice. And of course, you've seen several of the comments in the press about that. You know, there's also a problem on our side too. Sometimes police investigators or investigators are transferred from point to point, so it may be difficult to get your witnesses to give evidence when they ought to give evidence. There are, you know, complications of that type. But I think the most important is the dilatory tactics of lawyers who want to delay the cases interminably because they believe that, well, let's hold on for as long as possible. Maybe these guys will be kicked out, and then we will, you know, then we might get some reprieve. But I think that what is very obvious is that people recognize that we're not fooling around with the war against corruption. We're going after every one of these people, and we're going after them methodically. We're ensuring that we're tracking them with cooperation internationally. We're working with agencies all over the world, and that's how come we're able to track assets, we're able to track movement of funds and all that. And we're very deliberate about it, we're very organized about it. And, you know, sometimes, you know, people, if you don't hear a dramatic thing, you think nothing is going on. Well, that's not the case. I mean, every day we're working on these issues. And we very strongly believe that one of the major ways to fight economic crime is to deprive people of the proceeds of that crime. So when we deprive them, we name them and shame to a certain extent. We go through the process of trial. We keep working at it, you know, and we hope that we'll be able to get a better response from the administration of justice system, even as we cooperate with them to be faster.
What's your response to those who say that it is only members of the opposition that are being targeted by the economic and financial crimes
No, but
agencies?
it's not true. It's not true at all. If you look at prosecutions, even those who have been prosecuted, they are members of the National Assembly that have been prosecuted. They belong to our party. The Senate President was prosecuted, he belonged to our party. People seem to forget that there are many people who get prosecuted. I mean, recently, where the Secretary to the Government was suspended, the DGNI was suspended for just allegations. They had to step down from their office while investigations were going on. So I don't think it's a fair comment at all. And I think that people recognize that the President is the kind of person who really is completely neutral when it comes to that issue of you belong to a party or you're his friend or whatever it is. If you're corrupt, his whole attitude is you have to go after this guy and make sure he pays for the act. So I don't think that's true at all.
And thankfully, you've mentioned the former Secretary to the Government of the Federation, that presidential investigative panel that you were heading as VP. It was a 14-day deadline way back. You finished with that investigation. Why haven't we heard anything? What is happening?
Well, you know,
with the SGF?
You know what happened. You know, it was 14-day deadline. We were supposed to submit the report to the President on Monday, which would have been May the 8th.
Yes.
I believe May the 8th. He traveled for his medical vacation
on the 7th.
On the 7th. And he's only just returned. And just today we presented the report to him. You know, so the report has been presented.
And you're not going to tell us anything in the report?
Of course not.
I was hoping for a scoop.
Scoop.
Right, I've been listening to you at the event held to commemorate 50 years of the declaration of an independent state of Biafra by the late Chukwuemeka Ojukwu. 3 things that you said in the last couple of months that I've held on to. First, you said experience is the best teacher for a fool, but history is a better and kinder teacher. The second thing was a demand for secession is not exclusive to Nigeria, and that the answer to Nigeria's problems goes beyond secession. But yet you also admit that we shouldn't shy away from discussing the terms of our unity. And I thought, how can we discuss the terms of our unity when this administration says that our unity is not negotiable?
No, first of all, the terms of our unity suggest that we will be united. It does not suggest that we are going our separate ways. And what we're saying is that, look, this country must remain a united country. People have fought and died for the unity of this country. Our constitution says that we are a federation of 36 states and federal capital territory, etc. So it's very clear that the intention of the founding fathers and the intention of the framers of our constitution is that we remain united. Question is this the perfect union? Or in what ways can we make this a more perfect union? Yes. What are the things that we need to do to make this a more perfect union? There are those, for instance, who say that devolution of powers is the way to go, that you have to give more authority to the states. There are those who say resource control to a certain extent is what you need to do. There are those who say that, look, we shouldn't have a situation where any Nigerian needs to say that I am from X state.
Yes.
There are those who say that we shouldn't, that should not come into consideration at all. That we shouldn't state what your religion is, shouldn't state what your state is, that if you want a united Nigeria, this is how to go.
We should just say we're Nigerians.
Yeah, we're Nigerians. So there are many issues around our unity. We shouldn't shy away from discussing them. What we're saying is that secession is not an option. We shouldn't be talking about secession.
If people are saying they're marginalized,
yes.
I'm looking at it from a point that Section 14.3 of the Constitution has failed them.
Yeah.
Federal character says everyone must feel like they're part of it.
Yeah.
And if some people are saying, we're so not a part of this, we want to go, what is the big...
I think first of all, when people say they are marginalized, we must interrogate it. I have had discussions with several people, the different groups who have talked about marginalization and all that. And I've shown them facts and figures. I've shown figures, for example, of the cabinet, the cabinet of President Muhammad Buhari. There are those who say that, oh, we who are from the southeast have been marginalized,
in this administration.
Yes. Okay, so I've said, okay, let's look at the cabinet. If you look at the cabinet, the president's cabinet, you will see that first, there are several states that have only junior ministers, and these are states that voted heavily for the president. States such as Kaduna, states such as his own state, Katsina, states such as Sokoto, and several other states, especially in the north. They don't have a senior minister. Yes. Meanwhile, the southeastern states, the Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment is a senior minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs is a senior minister, Labor and Employment is a senior minister. The only person who is not a senior minister, the only Southeastern is in a major ministry, Ministry of Education, where is Minister of State. Yes. So if you look at the configuration of the cabinet, that marginalization allegation is not borne out. And have been able to demonstrate also by just looking at the appointments of CEOs. If you look at the appointment, it's not borne out either. As a matter of fact, you'll see that the South-South, for instance, has more people than the Northeast in the appointments of CEOs into parastatals. The Southeast also, has, I think, 2 or more people than the Northeast. Northwest has more by about 8 or 9. So even the gaps are not huge. There are those who argue. For instance, I've argued with a friend of mine who says, how come the service chiefs, there's nobody from the Southeast? That's what someone said. I said, well, a couple of years ago, there were 2 persons from the Southeast as security chiefs, as service chiefs, 2. At that time, it was okay. Once there are 2 people from one zone, it means that there won't be some from another zone. We can't begin to say we are so marginalized that we must secede on account of these kinds of things. That's not the way to go. In any event, I also want to say, and we must be entirely fair, that the Ohaneze Igbo and all of those have not said that they are interested in secession. What they're saying is that they want better deal and those kinds of things. That's what they've been saying. But I also believe very strongly that we must actively work at fairness. We mustn't assume that everybody is happy, but at the same time, we must also not allow a situation where people are just saying, I've been marginalized, we are marginalized, and without any demonstrable evidence. You must have the evidence, show us the evidence. Somebody will say, oh, Northerners are in this particular, and say, okay, look at other areas where you might say Southerners are. The largest ministry by far is headed by Southerner, Power Works and Housing, Petroleum, the Minister of State, the Central Bank, so many of these places, Pencom, huge 6.7 trillion.
As they call them, juicy places.
And these are places where, but nobody wants to look at that. And people argue, very convincingly that no, if someone said swap Central Bank for Chief of Army Staff, they may not be willing to,
do that. And I was watching you with Pandef. A lot of people thought, as we say locally, you fell their hand. They thought they were coming to complain. By the time you reeled out all that this administration had done for the Niger Delta, people were surprised. One of the questions I get asked a lot by a lot of students out there is, will there be an increase to the funds available to the Presidential Amnesty Program, especially the last 1 year? A lot of the students abroad, if they haven't come home, they're still there, they're struggling, they haven't had their monthly allowances, they haven't had their tuition fees paid. What is this government going to do about that?
First, we've increased the allocation in the 2017 budget. Okay. So that's gone up. But more interestingly, we've been meeting several times with the special advisor on the amnesty program, especially looking at questions around students in foreign countries and all that. And I had given a directive about almost 3 weeks ago that must be prioritized in expenditure, especially because they have nowhere to go, no one to turn to, So we're ensuring that that is prioritized. As a matter of fact, he gave us a rundown of what was going on in the different countries, what was owed and all that. And then we have now said, look, these boys and girls abroad must be the priority for payment from the amnesty fund. So we think that would improve, because we've increased in overall numbers. Yes. So I think that would improve.
When you were acting president, many people didn't understand that there isn't any difference between what the president can do and what the acting president can do. So because you're a professor of law, I'm asking you, is there anything that the president can do that the acting president cannot do?
No, constitutionally there is no difference whatsoever. Constitutionally there is no difference. As a matter of fact, if you look at the history of this whole acting president thing, it was under the Jonathan Yar'Adua regime, when President Jonathan was ill, there was no law. Yar'Adua was ill. There was no constitutional provision that allowed for an acting president, merely by the president being away on vacation. So there was of course, the constitutional amendment. So it's Constitutional Amendment 145 that now gives that power. So the president, if he's going on vacation, whether it's medical or not, writes to the Senate saying, I'm leaving on vacation, and by the provisions of the law, the vice president becomes the acting president with full constitutional powers to act in his place.
Must there be a proclamation? I mean, what I'm trying to say is, when the Senate gets the letter, do you not become acting president until the Senate president says, this is the letter now, the transmission is complete, you are now the acting president?
What the law says is that a letter must be written to the Senate. So, I mean, if one wanted to be technical, the moment the Senate receives the letter,
and reads it.
Well, it doesn't say they must read it. The Constitution doesn't say you must read it, but obviously it's the practice of the Senate to read out the letter, but all that the law says is sent to the Senate. Once it's sent to the Senate, the constitutional process kicks in, and the vice president becomes the acting president.
Would you give this administration a pass mark?
Oh yes, certainly. Certainly. I mean, I would. Of course, I know where we want to be, we can be, we think that we're going to do much more in the next few months. Yes. So, but so far so good.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President, for speaking with me today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.